Say that our overall goal, I think one of the most powerful things that came out of our food discussion was really a couple of initiatives that the folks that are in the food space really grappled around and actually got Kaiser's key staff to really talk about what niche opportunities existed or seemed possible within the food space, within Kaiser particularly. That group has met subsequently and have been sort of noodling around ideas of catering, local catering opportunities and food processing and something else. I can't remember what the other opportunities are. So we want to do the same thing about the whole carbon clean energy space. And to figure out that we heard a number of fabulous examples of what is possible, what is doable. And none of this works unless folks here in this market, in this region, have either the interest or the capacity, resources to make it happen. But it's this space, it's the collective intelligence in this space which will get that conversation going. And so just to get things started, I'm going to throw this to Joe.
Okay, I'm Joe Bialowitz. I work for Kaiser Permanente in our national headquarters in our environmental stewardship department. So what I do is coordinate a lot of the efforts throughout the organization to improve health by creating a healthier environment. And some of the presenters that I heard so far today were, I think, summed it up quite well, and there are a lot of opportunities here. Kaiser has several medical centers in the areas that we intend to work in Richmond and in Oakland. A few of the ideas that I heard that I think we could probably take and try to build out a little more would be, well, first of all, Eric talked about making renewable energy credits available to employees through I forget what you call it, but what the program will be called, but essentially it's a benefit to employees. I think that as a large system, we could make that available to not only all of our employees but our members as well. We have to probably start with the employees first, see how that goes. But we also have we have about 200,000 employees and contractors working for us, as well as physicians. We have over 10 million members, so there's quite a few throughout the organization, quite a few locally here in Oakland and in Richmond. To make that work, I think that we should think a little bit more about how you sell that, how you pitch that to people to really make them participate in that kind of program. One thing that we found when we have had success in the past, we've used what we call a take and give model with our own employees, where if we want them to do something that's healthy for them, like for example, to take a health assessment, we found that if we ask them to do that on their own, we have a pretty low participation rate. But if we ask them to do it, and in return for them taking that assessment, Kaiser will donate to a program that doubles the value of food stamps for people at farmers markets called Wholesome Wave. That's a program that we've been involved with for a while now. That actually immediately increased the participation rate quite a bit in these employee health assessments that we were asking them to take. So I think that for hospitals in general to get their own employees or get their own patients, or maybe an insurance plan for their members, to get them more involved, you have to have some sort of match or some sort of skin in the game from the employer or the organization itself, and that is it is an investment, but we make community benefit grants and investments all the time, and if we could find a way to do that, there's quite a bit of funding that we could mobilize there. So maybe we could pilot that early on. And then the other thing I wanted to just point out was that in terms of mobilizing capital, there's quite a bit of capital that could be mobilized here. And when you have a program like the one in the Bronx, which potentially is going to be able to demonstrate empirically that you've lowered costs for the entire Medicaid program in the state of New York. You could show that to some big green bond investors. You know, I think Goldman Sachs would be interested in seeing that, and you know, they could basically create a bond at that point and you know, get it paid for out of the savings from the Medicaid program. So just a few ideas there, but start off with that.
Any other ideas, or what resonated with any of you, or what you're currently doing that can lend itself to thinking about how we create clean energy, health, and wealth opportunities in this region? Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Yasi. I work at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. We're working on getting Oakland to commit its support to worker-owned cooperatives, and Colin mentioned this earlier, and we think it's very important because worker-owned cooperatives create dignified, high-paying jobs in Oakland that will stay here because the people that work there own it, and it's in their best interest that the job stays here. Also, if the jobs and the work is based in this region and people live here, they tend to be more responsible socially and environmentally. Next month, on the 8th of September, City Council will be hopefully passing a resolution to commit their support to worker-owned cooperatives, and that will hopefully be the first step towards getting some more teeth behind their commitments. Getting preferential purchasing from the city, having the city become essentially an anchor institution for worker cooperatives is our goal, one of our goals.
Can I ask, so what is the basis of the ordinance is just priority of procurement priorities? Is there any money involved? What's the ordinance?
Yeah. So the ordinance that we've drafted, which is not being introduced in September, but we hopefully will pass it later, has a few elements, basically trying to level the playing field for worker-owned cooperatives. It's a lot more difficult to access finance. As a worker cooperative, it's a lot more difficult to actually figure out your legal structure as a worker cooperative. And it's also difficult to get stable, market and get stable customers. So having the city procure services and goods from co-ops is one element. So contracting preferentially with co-ops. But another element is providing technical assistance, or at least partnering with the many organizations in Oakland and this Bay Area to provide the resources that they need for business development. And also creating a revolving loan fund for co-ops to access finance. Similar things to what's being done in New York City, Madison, Austin, and Cleveland.
Al, did I see your hand?
Oh, you didn't see my hand, but I just wanted to say
you
that.
grabbed the mic.
Yeah, I grabbed the mic, but sort of what's new, I mean, just to reflect on what's new for me in this conversation is that I had thought about anchor institutions largely as on the procurement level, as sort of institutions that procure and therefore they generate opportunity through procurement. And the notion that I'm getting very strongly here is of anchor organizations that's really being very, I hate this word, but proactive, but sort of really drivers of kinds of social and community change. And to me that's sort of like just a new way of thinking about it that I think does open up lots of opportunities to think about that. I think what Joe here said about trying to argue the power of what's being done in Bronx on the basis of saving the healthcare system or public monies is like, I mean, that's a really novel notion that can happen. But I'm just sort of wondering, like in the case of Montefiore and whatnot, so some of these, what would other than, trying to have a good reputation or whatever, sort of meeting some kind of a public or health need, Many of these large institutions are still driven by bottom line considerations. So I'm trying to understand a little bit like how to change that whole discussion so that anchor organizations like Kaiser or whatever are not, you know, sort of making decisions totally on the basis of their own bottom line, but on some broader notion of bottom line for the community. So I'm just sort of curious about that, because that can be a very that seems like it could be a very powerful driver.
So I guess one piece is, I mean, it's the ACA writ large, Affordable Care Act writ large, is made for a lot of hospitals, made doing the right thing connected to their bottom line now, but in theory, as everyone is trying to figure that out. And so part of, right, that's an interesting pathway for us all to walk down and try and figure out and push what that could mean and what that could look like. In our context, in our case, the other piece is organized labor. So the Healthcare Workers Union has a critical role to play in a broad negotiation with a hospital system like Montefiore around what it needs to care about in terms of its performance and its behavior. And given what that kind of a healthcare worker union looks like, it is very much a union made up of low-income folks in the Bronx, in central Brooklyn, and so there's tremendous potential there for a real conversation and a real back and forth that gets the hospital institution to have to really care about its outcomes in the community, beyond sort of its reputational and institutional mandate interests.
Nick, can I follow up on that with a question? So I know that the Medicaid redesign in New York is part of the goal was to eliminate something like 25% of beds, is to really reduce the number of beds. And that's obviously going to impact the number of people employed. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the labor piece, because I think some of the remarks that I've heard from people on the other side, from the healthcare, the individuals who have to negotiate with the labor unions, is that they're not really interested in coming to the table about the future, where everything is going. And I'm just curious of how, I'm assuming it's SEIU, or right, SEIU, how the conversation is played out in your context to think about really, okay, we have this tremendous opportunity around Medicaid redesign, and it's going to set the tone for who knows how long in terms of reimbursement. And how does this fact that there might be some jobs lost, and the union can't be necessarily entrenched simply around protecting those jobs entirely, but around what the opportunities are going to be. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, a little bit. And this is not my area of expertise, just as a caveat. But so 1199, the SEIU local, has to go through sort of a deep thinking around this subject, and there's a lot of different ideas. From the pieces I've heard and pieces that we've been in discussion with, but there is a general expectation that through this redesign you have, and there's arguments, of course, about how much of a reduction you need to have to hit the savings in terms of beds or in terms of the number of traditional jobs. There is an expectation that there's a significant growth in jobs in the community of community healthcare workers, and then the traditional fight that could be had is, are they good jobs or are they low-wage jobs, right? Possibly the more generative part of the conversation could be that a union like 1199 has a unique vantage point in the healthcare system which is that they represent workers in hospitals, in clinics, home aides, nursing homes. They see the whole spectrum. So is the union actively involved and deeply engaged in the transformation of the healthcare system? Or are they either on their own, because everyone sees them, either by the larger system relegated to their traditional position or relegating themselves to their traditional position of just negotiating around wages and benefits. So I think there's there's many ways, from a simplistic standpoint, there's two sort of ways that this could get played out and fought over, or sort of developed and nurtured, but there's a tremendously powerful and different kind of way that I think community labor and industry could come together to think through this challenge that's coming down on them. And so it doesn't have to be, but we got to fight to keep the hospitals at the exact way they are. That's not serving our own people. Like 1199 is very much a community organization when you look at who makes it up, right? So they're the patients, they're the workers, they're the community residents that are getting the broader impacts.
Can I ask a follow-on comment for Linda? I was very envious of that. I don't know, is it on? I'm always envious and jealous about the Medicaid payment rate that New York has in comparison to California. It's because it's abysmal, because we're near the very, very bottom on a per capita basis. And it made me wonder, and I'm going to ask Linda because you're closer to this, at least historically, than I am at this moment, of what are the opportunities in California for the current 1115 waiver? Because Montefiore is, I'm sure, deeply engaged, and they're putting, it sounds like a lot of in-kind services, but $250,000 pass-through is very nice. I mean, that's nice to be able to have the government pay to do the right thing. Are there any opportunities, do you think? Ha ha ha.
Can we have some trickle-down effect?
I'd be surprised to see that kind of matching grant for something like this right now, but there's a lot of conversation, as you know, going on about how can we use the Medicaid waiver here to create, accountable communities for health or accountable care communities, and there's lots of different conversation. The endowment's been quite involved in a lot of that. So, I do think that that asthma is probably the best case for actually being able to quickly show some kind of return on investment, which of course the Medicaid agencies are going to be looking for. Maybe diabetes, but not. There hasn't been as clear a demonstration for really quick return on investment for doing this kind of thing. And asthma, it's been shown over and over and over again, and what's been missing is just the capital to go out and institute these kinds of programs.
Can I just add one thing? So I think we are on our way, hopefully, to being able to demonstrate with some degree of certainty what the return on investment is. But one of the challenges that we've come up against, and this was even more prominent in the beginning conversations with Montefiore before we realized that this Medicaid money could be put towards this project, is that they don't actually know how much an emergency room visit costs them, or hospitalization. So there's a good amount of fudge work and value judgments being made, even when you do the very cold economic analysis of what the return on investment is.
Just one other comment, though, is that the other thing that's really different in California is that the penetration of managed care is much, much higher in California. So that also changes the whole dynamic around what the payment incentive structures are.
Yes.
Sure, thank you so much. I wanted to follow up on a point you made earlier, Nick, about jobs, and specifically as these investments are being made to improve the sustainability of these regions, what are we doing to make sure that diverse and equitable hiring practices are being promoted so that we can work towards simultaneously bridging the racial employment gap while also addressing these environmental barriers in the community as well?
So Can I answer, I mean, at least give one answer to that? So one of the things that's the core of Emerald Cities, right? We have a three-part mission: green our cities, build our communities, and ensure inclusion of low-income communities of color as we build this particularly clean energy sector, which is one of our core competencies. So in our work throughout the country, we are working with labor. We're putting community workforce agreements together so that these are in the way that Colin and the Clean Energy Alliance talked about, making sure that they are paid good wages when they do the energy retrofit work or the solar work, that they've got careers and benefits and a trajectory for continuing education. But in addition to that, and that was just the workforce, and that's in hiring disadvantaged workers, all kinds of identities. But we have also what we call E-Contractor Academy. So in the state of California, our Los Angeles office specifically is training small, minority, women, veteran contractors to get into the clean energy space and to particularly understand and get green building skills as well as understand public procurement policies, because particularly in California, ratepayer funds is $1.5 billion a year just on energy efficiency. There were like 2 minority contractors who are actually getting work with that $1.5 billion a year of energy efficiency money. So we've trained over 100 small minority women contractors in the LA Orange County marketplace that are pre-qualifying for work to retrofit municipal buildings and the Prop 39 projects to do school construction retrofit. So that is a core element of what we are trying to do, is to build a workforce which we think is almost evergreen in terms of being able to continue to employ people, but employ them at good wages.
So I'm Alison with Project Equity, and super excited about the, closer? Is that, hello?
Yes, as you use it. Where do you use
Okay,
it?
so super excited about the workforce conversation, and we're focused on worker and cooperatives, so I'm gonna sort of weave that in. So this concept of let's make sure the workforce is, representative of the communities that we're trying to partner with. We often think about, well, we need to start up new businesses in order to make that happen. There is actually another path, which is that you can go out and you can find businesses that are interested in converting to become worker-owned cooperatives. So there's a potential opportunity here, because oftentimes the challenge is you don't have a company of the right size that can handle the needs of an anchor institution. Or if you were to go back to the Kaiser example of encouraging employees first to do solar, who would you contract with to do that? And so if you could think of ways to incentivize companies and then partner with organizations that can help them to, in our experience of Project Equity, there's the businesses that already have some kind of a mission, whether it's an environmental mission or otherwise, are the ones that are more likely to be interested in thinking about employee ownership, adding that on as another leg to their mission. We're right now working with a solar company that is in the process of transitioning and in conversation with a couple of others, just as an example. So I want to make sure that we're considering that strategy also in terms of encouraging businesses to become worker co-ops, but not just thinking about startups, also thinking about existing. They can be large-sized companies and can also make that transition, that impact leg and that community sort of power to the business.
Yeah, thanks for that idea. One of the things that we found with our small contractor training program is that they're small. And they're finding each other in our training venue to actually come together. We've had 2, actually, both of them women, joint venture partnerships that have actually bid and won some major, like $12 million green building projects, for example, most recently. But the whole idea that, they can do better together, and then if they think about it as a cooperative and how to build these joint ventures as a cooperative is actually a very, very good idea. Actually, we haven't even incorporated that, so it's something we want to think about. Training how to do that, because that's a whole different kind of business model and needs to have training modules that are appropriate for that.
So this group's called Anchors for Resilient Communities. So I thought I'd pose the question, if are there projects in the East Bay right now that you guys are familiar with where, a boost from an anchor would be of assistance? Or, do you see potential for that? I mean, we heard a little bit from Joel about how Kaiser might be able to access its employees and ultimately its members. But where those of you who are working in the energy space, I'm looking over at Al, but I know a lot of you guys are, where do you see real opportunities where, if there was that larger buyer or purchaser, that would really make a difference in being able to move the dial on this?
So, is this working? So, I don't know if she's still here, but the woman who was here from Oakland Unified, this is another solar example, Energy Solidarity Cooperative, they go by ESC, is a solar co-op, and they're working both to provide education to the next generation through partnering with schools, and also to put, rooftop solar on, community buildings, including schools. So thinking of the Unified School District, think of universities, that's just a case study of a kind of ready-to-go project that could benefit.
I just, a note on our solar employee program that 2 health systems that are signed up to participate are Cleveland Clinic and University Hospitals. And they are very involved with the Evergreen Cooperative. And so to get them in the program, one of the things that we did was to make sure that the solar companies involved with the Evergreen Cooperative are the qualified local solar installers for this program, which was so important to them to join it. So that is a way that they've used their connections to the community to dictate who's actually going to do the solar installation, and kind of completes the circle for them.
So can I put Pablo on the spot? We heard early on that Dignity was a leader in some of the green purchasing and other energy work. What's up? What you got?
A lot of the work that's being done at our facilities is around making sure that the facilities are more, the decrease of the carbon footprint exists. And the new facilities have the infrastructure to reduce the use of energy. But we've been using our community investment program to invest in outside companies like Craft 3, who are actually providing capital for to businesses that are producing green energy and increasing jobs. So those are our current efforts. We're moving our community investment portfolio to be more of a sector related, and one of the sector is energy efficiency.
Maybe, Pablo, could you maybe say a few things about how Dignity, particularly here in the Bay Area, or maybe not just in the Bay Area, around the state, is really looking at some of the vulnerabilities in health that have been created by climate change, like drought and scarcity of water and some of those other things. So I just thought maybe to round out the picture, you might want to.
Sure. One of the projects that we're currently reviewing is actually one of the Cal Endowment's project is Agua for All, which affects really the access to water in the Central Valley. I don't know if a lot of folks here heard, but Steve and I were in Merced about 4 weeks ago. We were told that Merced actually fell 24 inches because of the water. And those wells will never ever get filled again. So it's a major ecological issue that's happening all throughout the state. So one of our efforts is really to pump some grant dollars to purify some of the water distribution sites, purify water access in schools and through clinics, whatever method that can still pump water from well, that makes sure that water is clean. Especially around for kids. So that's one effort. Other efforts that we're looking to is how can we invest in the infrastructure to make sure that water is distributed in a different way that's more sustainable than it currently is. We're not looking to buy Southern California so we can cut them off, but if we could, there might be a chance.
A lot of people down there.
Lisa lives down there.
We'll sell you water. We'll sell you water.
What you gonna do about those almonds, man?
But I had a question for you folks. Have you looked into social impact bonds to sustain the work that you're doing? I want to pass the buck real quickly.
Not in any deep way yet. I mean, we're aware of that, and we have some good finance folks working with us to get them. But we want to nail the project, demonstrate the outcomes, be really solid and clear on that, and then think about that. And I don't know, but when you raised that question initially, and I hope this isn't offensive, but the first question that came to my mind is, why is there another way to get at that savings? Because I've thought about that savings a lot. If we are actually saving money for the state and not have Goldman play, but have us play with the support of others to help structure and manage that, but actually capture that value in a deeper way. That was actually literally the thing that came to mind. I agree. If we're going to scale the project, we have to.
There's other ways outside Goldman.
I'll ask another sort of Bay Area question.
Well, I wasn't sure if you wanted to add something on that also.
Not on that specifically. I think it's good. It's a good discussion.
Well, I would just make 2 points. One is that social impact bonds are all the rage right now. So they're capturing everyone's imagination. But the field of impact investing has been around for 50 years and has always innovated ways to finance things that were socially productive, including things like healthy homes. So I suspect you've probably studied some of the models of Mercy Housing and others that have looked at how to provide supportive housing services that keep people with substance abuse issues and behavioral issues out of the emergency department, and they've costed that out, and they've invested in that kind of housing long before social impact bonds were created. So there are a whole range of mechanisms that can be used, of which social impact bonds is a new and very interesting one, but not the only one. The other thing is that the value of bringing Goldman Sachs and its cohorts to our table is that that's where the big bucks are. And so they have federal laws that require them to invest in low-income communities, the Community Reinvestment Act. Increasingly, their wealth management clients want into these projects. And so, we may have the opportunity to scale our efforts in ways that were heretofore more challenging. I think as we navigate down that path, it's going to be very important that we set the standards and we monitor the standards. And that will have to be worked out on a case-by-case basis and establish best practices and go from there. And there have been social impact deals where conventional lenders, like Goldman Sachs, have not been able to participate because they couldn't get the return that they wanted. And so, this is being played out in the marketplace right now.
All right. So I'm going to try a slightly different angle, I guess. So when we were working in Cleveland many years ago, and we created what was then called Ohio Cooperative Solar, now Evergreen Energy Solutions, we were able to make the claim, and it was true, that we were doubling solar production in the state of Ohio with our small company of 20 to 25 people, which tells you something about the level of solar generation in the state of Ohio, more than the size of our company, right? So, you know, there was 2 megawatts in the entire state, so we did 2, so now. And so I gather that the state of play is a little different in the Bay Area, but, you know, sort of, you know, what is sort of the leading edge, or where are you focusing your efforts, those of you who are in sort of that energy space, and you know, what would be the most productive way to think about where we're at in the Bay Area in this energy space?
Well, that feels like it's a little bit more directed than me, so I'll answer it this time. We're between a rock and a hard place is the answer. So the concept is that you have a public agency that's responsible for running the energy system, and that means reducing energy demand and procuring the energy that's needed, and doing it locally in a way that is an investment in the community. You know, people pay for electricity, so you invest, there's a good return on investment, and all that. But on the other hand, you have the utilities that are dead set against this model, and you have the traditional utility worker unions in bed with the utilities in opposing it, and you have those folks in motion as part of a whole national effort to roll back rooftop solar, you know, in the country, and in particular in California. The net metering laws, which is, you know, the type of program under which rooftop solar is done, you know, sort of expired, and there was a bill last year, and they're going to totally revamp that, and the utilities have come out with their model for how this would be done, and it wouldn't be done, right? In other words, cut out rooftop solar. So basically, all the programs that could really benefit the community in terms of low-income communities of color, providing much more control, and through especially a public agency, are being opposed by all the power structure that exists. So, I mean, so that's the difficulty. There's a vision, there's a program, there are forces in motion to try to make it happen, but then there are the traditional energy establishment that's set against this. So this is where, you know, I perk up when I start to hear about anchor institutions, you know, playing a much more important role around the questions of health, because the anchor institutions have some power, they have some play, they have some influence, and they can talk about, well, our role here is to increase the health of the community, and you don't really do that by building renewable energy out in the desert, taking the wealth out of the community to pay for that stuff, reinforcing the power of the traditional energy monopolies, and so on and so forth. So, you know, the anchor institutions, if they play you know, a more forward-looking role about what really needs to be done, you know, that's a discussion that we could have that could really strengthen the ability of community-based renewable energy production. So, I mean, we're in the space of being in a pitched battle around, you know, the dark forces of the past and what we need, really, you know, in order to move forward. And anchor institutions that are either public institutions that represent the community in one form or another, like the city or something, the schools or whatever, or institutions that, like Kaiser, that are, Dignity, is that what it's called? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Pablo and stuff like that, right? You know, I mean, who have this vision of what you have to do to address the health needs of the community, and where doing that actually will save a lot of social capital. You know, those institutions start getting out there and saying, well, yeah, we're into needing a new model, and we're going to put our power and backing into that model, and we'll work it out together. I just want to say that, you know, cooperatives are an important place, and unions are an important place. And the truth is that if you have a community-based energy system, that public kind of agency can set all kinds of labor standards, right, that then make work good for low-income people of color, what would normally be a very low classification of labor. You can get in there, so you can address, the family needs as well of people, and you create a new environment for organizing. So all those things are really closely related together around this. So I'm just throwing that out. It's yet to be determined where this is going to come down. It's a fight.
I just wanted to say, just as an addition to your really thoughtful comments, is that, for some of us who are working in this area of anchor institution and increasing their engagement with local communities, we actually consider utility companies to be anchors, which may be, even more complicated given what you said about, I guess, some of the harmful aspects of the way those public utility companies actually utilize resources, land, energy, and et cetera. But I think in the definition of anchors, some of us consider public utilities like PG&E, God forbid that we should mention their name here, to be an anchor institution. They invest a lot of money they invest a lot as a place-based institution. They build those power stations, those transformers, or whatever they build, and they're not going to move them. They're going to stay there for the most part. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix. Also to say that at one point, we were considering, I think, Tara, you were a part of this discussion, we were considering inviting the San Francisco Public Utility Commission, not the regulatory body, but the public utility, to actually come and either present or sit at the table in some way, because even though they are themselves a utility provider, I think is water and power for the city of San Francisco, they also have a very, very, I would say, advanced public benefit program that they have developed as well to actually give back to the local community. So this is not to try to change the narrative around the ways that public utilities either are good citizens or not, but I just wanted to throw that into the mix, that they are anchors for some of us.
Just say a word about that. There's utilities and there's utilities, right? PG&E is not a public utility. It's an investor-owned utility, right? And it's very important to make that distinction. San Francisco Public Utilities Commission is a public utility. There are municipal utilities and whatnot. But PG&E in particular, that investor-owned utility, spends a huge amount of money, trying to get a good reputation in the community and to buy political power and to do a lot of stuff. But they are dead set against what we need as a community in terms of a real future. For our community, and they buy influence and they buy it big time, but it shouldn't fool us about where they really stand. They don't stand with us; they stand against us. And I understand that for a lot of organizations, they get funding from the utilities. That's not that's payola is what it is. That's buying influence, and it's very clear that that's the case. I mean, I could go into detail, but
I can tell you have a lot of
strong opinions.
You have a lot of thoughts on the subject, so thank you for edifying us.
We are coming down to the sort of end of our conversation, but let's have a couple of more probes, if I could. One is that I see, Joe, you want to say something. Something just to consider. The question, Steve, is like, where are the opportunities?
Yeah.
There's really two markets, right? There's the residential market and the work with the healthy communities, for example, the affordable housing, the public housing, as well as the single-family housing. Maybe there's three, all right? There's the single-family housing and how you aggregate that, and then there's the multifamily, particularly affordable public housing where the really low-income communities and vulnerable communities live. We really want to figure out how to leverage anchor institutions to work in those marketplaces. But then the third market are the anchors themselves. Anchor institutions that would themselves lower their own carbon footprint, I think, as Pablo talked about. What can we do to help health institutions and others reduce their own carbon footprint and generate jobs in the process, local jobs? But also, how can they help on the resilient side, not just mitigating carbon emissions, but how can they actually help create microgrids, which anchors the rest of the community? So the affordable housing residents or folks that are in single-family houses that can't take solar because their roofs won't step. How can we develop community energy districts anchored by the anchors themselves, who are large energy generators that could make the technical and financial feasibility of these microgrids worthwhile? So it would almost be looking at our anchor partners and looking at these decentralized energy resources that we'd love to be able to explore. The last thing I would say, though, is what are we doing about, on the resilient side, outpatient facilities? When you think about when, the grid goes down and you look at the senior citizen homes and, even public housing and all these outpatient facilities where people are on lifelines, whether, for breathing, whatever, how are we beginning to ensure that those places are able to withstand extreme weather conditions, and how can we prioritize those critical facilities for energy retrofit as a part of, the most vulnerable health populations that we have to get to? These are some markets that I would love for us to explore. Joe?
It comes down to finance, right? I mean, without any finance, these organizations are not going to be able to do what you're asking them to do. So either the government has to step up and give some kind of, grant for them to do it. I don't see unless they can raise the individual rents to pay for it. One of the things that we try to do is to create a fund that actually provided very low interest loans, only 0% interest loans, to FQHCs to put solar panel on the roofs. Because we thought if they could reduce the cost of energy, that money would go back into the clinic and actually it gets part of their budget to service.
How'd that work?
It didn't.
Why?
For the reason being the FQHCs did not understand the concept. Two is the debt ratio of a clinic is too high. So there were all these obstacles. But it's logical.
Yeah.
You put a solar panel on an FQHC, you make it self-sustainable. It's a win-win. But it's just the money's not there.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's the debt thing.
Pablo, quick question on that.
Joe, and then
On the debt ratio piece, what ways have you guys tried to use the community investment portfolio in it as equity rather than debt to kind of balance out that ratio?
We've done
work in this context?
We've done actually equity investing in several CDFIs. We actually took our first hit on an equity investment, which is with Shore Bank. But we've done several other things.
But would it work in a type of financing instrument like this, or not really? It would have to be through an intermediary.
It has to be an intermediary because we don't have the capacity to go deal by deal by deal. I mean, that would mean I would have to hire at least 10 or 20 or 100 individuals to do this kind of thing. But you put it through a CDFI, put it through an intermediary, but they don't want to take, the intermediary don't want to take the chance of taking these hits.
Pablo, we've talked about this at Kaiser as well, and we do have an idea to try to sort of share the model that we developed for buying renewable energy and share that with other hospitals, and maybe even help them to pool their resources into a group purchase, and maybe then the debt issues may not be as big of a deal, or Kaiser could even help to sort of back the loan. So. Those are much bigger discussions than just a couple of communities. It's actually the whole nation that's sort of in play right now. I mean, Eric might have even more visibility into that as well because I think has been thinking along the same lines at Healthcare Without Harm. But Eric, do you have anything to add to that at this point, or?
No, just that we want to talk to you more about that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I guess one thing, a rumor that I've heard about Kaiser is that you're looking at subsidizing low-income health plan members to be able to purchase renewables and part of the energy that you're going to generate through your renewable project. And I'm not sure of the truth of that, but that seems like an incredibly exciting model if it is indeed happening.
It's a great idea. I don't think it's been done yet. No. But you know, in theory, there's a lot of renewable energy we could purchase. I mean, the renewable energy that we did purchase, we believe was pretty much cost neutral. We got a 20-year fixed price on our electricity, and it works financially because it's a hedge. It's not, doesn't cost us more. It's a hedging strategy. You can't get a 20-year fixed price on natural gas. Nobody will give it to you. But you can get it on electricity, and it just makes sense for any anchor institution, really, a healthcare organization, a university, any organization that anticipates being there in 20 years and operating its own buildings. Those organizations should be entering into long-term agreements to purchase their electricity and lock in the price in a world where energy price volatility is bound to occur. So it just makes a lot of sense. And then, you know, everything else flows from that. You know, can we enable our low-income members to be part of that as well? I mean, are we going to have surplus energy? Can we be sort of net positive on our carbon emissions? And the answer is probably yes. I mean, if we identify more and more of these large-scale solar installations, possibly community solar could be a part of that as well.
Is there a particular, and Sharon, you're next and probably last.
It's been good, yeah.
Specific thing that you think we could do with Kaiser and perhaps Dignity in this East Bay space?
When it comes to changing a large organization like a Kaiser Permanente, it's important to try to identify where there's existing momentum around in society. And in California, a lot of it is regulatory. A lot of it is you have a mandatory commercial recycling ordinance. So hospitals need to be recycling now. And I think I doubt many hospitals are doing it well yet. We need probably some green job training for our housekeeping staff to enable them to potentially sort through the trash containers and extract the recycling out of it. There is actually a group I heard of, I think they're active in San Francisco right now. They're essentially training, I think, the former prison population to go out and sort through people's trash containers and take the recycling out. It's a very green job training program, and they're doing it, and they're successful thus far. Also on the regulatory front, there's a 50-50-50 legislation going through Sacramento right now, which among other things will require improvement in efficiency of vehicles on the road in California have to be 50% more fuel efficient. So hospitals are huge trip generators, and we have our own fleet vehicles. We should be electrifying those fleet vehicles very quickly. And that could be done in a cost-neutral way. I mean, I've heard there's a company right now that will lease you electric vehicles for your fleet at no extra cost. And the other one taking place right now that I would point to is bike sharing in the Bay Area. I was struck by Linda's statistic about active transportation and how that has a potentially bigger health impact than just cleaning up the air. And you know, we should be getting in Richmond and Oakland, we should be actively reaching out to the local bike sharing organization and making sure that there's quite a few bike sharing stations at our facilities for our employees, for our visitors. It would be a great thing, and that bike sharing program is actually going to generate jobs as well. I mean, you have to maintain those bikes, and then the cities themselves have to start adjusting once the bikes are there. You start building complete streets. It takes a lot of manpower to do that, and I think it's going to be a win-win on a lot of different fronts.
Thanks. This was interesting and a lot of really good ideas. I want to come back actually to the call to action that Elaine Peacock started us out with, which was really, and Roxanne, before she had to leave, was saying this is about strengthening economic infrastructure that's been destroyed over the past couple generations. And so the particular interest of anchor institutions in the place they live and the place they exist in terms of building not only capacity and resiliency, but creating assets and value out in those communities. I think in the last decade, we've really seen the value where communities have assets versus where communities were over-leveraged. And I think we should expand this definition of resiliency to include that kind of capturing of wealth, and not sending it to Goldman Sachs, but figuring out how it continues to circulate in that community and what kind of policies help make sure that it distributes multiple times and in equitable ways, because all of the policies we've talked about today really could improve health outcomes, could improve environmental outcomes, but could still leave us very vulnerable and very non-resilient if we don't address those fundamental wealth and asset considerations. Really interesting conversation. Great stuff.
Well, thank you all for a great conversation this afternoon. A lot of good information came out on the table. I'm excited about the prospects. I think it's a big net, but we're going to hone in sort of on one-on-one to figure out how we can help build this into our plan for the East Bay. Hopefully you'll stay engaged, and Tara will keep you engaged. Let's thank Tara for helping to organize this day. Great job, Tara. Let's thank Elaine for her hospitality and being here at TCE, and thank all of our guests that have come as far as New York City, or was it Mondragon? I'm not sure how far you actually came to be here with us, and everyone else for participating and contributing to a healthier and wealthier community.